Welcome into a special edition of NebPreps Postgame. Not your usual host. I'm Austin Jacobsen. This is Ravi Lulla, and we have some special information, or more opinions, that we want to share from this episode coming from Hurrdat Sports and NebPreps, because the conversation has been brought up once again, Ravi, and we're talking not only about one of the top teams in the country, but the number one team in the state of Nebraska, Millard South, and there's more controversy that comes out because
always more.
We see more forfeitures happening across the state, and specifically the one that's riled up everyone once again this week is Lincoln High electing to cancel their contest with Millard South, a game that was supposed to be played between the Lynx and the Patriots. Millard South, as we talked about, they're one of the top 20 teams in the nation now, right? They have been the number one team in the state of Nebraska. They're winning by 70 points per game. I just want to get your initial thoughts on how you feel about this entire situation and where you've seen kind of the boiling over point that came earlier this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into this, right? Because it's not just about the one forfeiture of Lincoln High versus Millard South, right? It's never about the one thing that causes the overflow to happen. And so I sit here and I go, okay, what are people actually mad about? And I can't really figure it out, if I'm being honest, because blowouts at Class A or any other level are not new. Forfeitures at any level are not new. Class A, it actually is kind of the outlier, despite the narratives about Millard South, or a couple years ago West Side, or 6 years ago Bellevue West, or before that Millard North. And that's kind of my point, though, also being able to rattle off those teams, because it's not like Millard South's been doing this for 20 years. It's not like, I mean, we may forget this. They have exactly one state title appearance with this group. Now, they won it last year, but they didn't even make the final 2 years ago. They got upset by Elkhorn South in the semis. And so we're sitting here and we're having this whole meltdown about competitive balance and high school sports and what does it mean. And listen, there's some things there worth discussing. But none of this is new.
Right.
This has never been new. This has always been. There's always been blowouts. I was at Millard North in 2003. You think anybody felt good about playing that team? Not a soul.
Right.
They went 270 average across the offensive line. You think any high school was prepared for that? I knew a guy that played DN for Westside that year that weighed 180. You think he had a good time that day? No, absolutely not. This is not new. That's 22 years ago, and it wasn't new then. Pick a team. 03 Millard North, 19 Bellevue West, 23 Westside. 22 Westside, 23 Westside, 24 Millard South, 25 Millard South. This has always happened. And then that's just Class A. I would argue it's worse in the smaller classes. I would argue it's dramatically worse. The forfeit numbers back that up.
Right, and we can talk a little bit about that, too. Because
that's where this sort of started with Millard South this week.
Now, obviously, there is a forfeiture that will happen later this week. We're recording this on Wednesday, but as we are talking right now, leading into, I believe it's week 7 of the regular season across all classes, 6-man, 8-man, C2, C1, every single class, there has not been a forfeiture of a contest outside of the suspended game that happened between Arborview and Millard South due to other circumstances. But there's not been a forfeiture of a contest in classes A, B, or C1. But there are 38 in C2, both 8-man classes and the 6-man classes. And listen, I come from smaller communities. I covered a lot of these places in different media outlets that I was in central and western Nebraska. Those are usually due to low numbers or non-competitive teams as well. They're fearful of, team health, team safety, regulation, that sort of stuff too. This happened as well when we saw teams transitioning from completely new programs, and even Omaha Metro schools, Omaha Buena Vista, Lincoln Northwest, some of these larger area schools elected to not play varsity football schedules because they were fearful of either the degradation of the program from that early of a state, what it would look like. They elected to play competitive junior varsity contests. But this is part of the sport, right?
Yeah, always has been.
And my argument with this entire thing is we always hate the winners, right? It's part of the process. In the 90s, nobody wanted to like the Cowboys except for Cowboys fans. It was easy to join the bandwagon. High school sports are different, and I can completely agree with that. It's not in the best interest of everyone in the state to get back onto the Millard South bandwagon and say, oh, wow, look how great they are and how much they blow everyone out. But also, can we not celebrate the fact that this is a nationally ranked Millard South team that is likely going to win the state championship? No one just hands them the trophy. They still have to go win a couple of games.
Still got to do it.
They still have to go do it. But nonetheless, this collection of student athletes is, to me, in my opinion, something that we should probably actually be celebrating a little bit more, because they're putting Nebraska onto a national stage. And yes, it does hurt for the local transparency of it. And I understand people want to have high school sports be as competitive as possible. But when has that ever been the case? I mean, we were both in high school at different times, but you mentioned Millard North was blowing out some teams in those early 2000s. I grew up in the Panhandle. Scottsbluff basketball used to just run roughshod over people in that Panhandle area until everyone else kind of was able to keep up with them. This happens. Competitive imbalance is everywhere. It's not just in Omaha. It's not just in the rural parts of the state. It's everywhere across all classes.
So I think that's part of the big misconception about this, is that it's either this is an Omaha Lincoln versus the rest of the state problem, or it's a Class A versus the rest of the state problem. I mean, how many games in a row did Bennington win? Did we have this conversation?
Oh, yeah, it was like 30-some, right?
Did we have this conversation about Bennington?
No.
Not really?
Nope.
You know, and so...
Well, it's because they weren't winning by 70, though. That's everyone's argument. Just competitive imbalance.
Go look at some of the scores. I challenge you. Look at some of the scores from any class, particularly C1, C2, D1, D2, and 6-man. Go look at some of those scores, and you will see what competitive imbalance looks like. And that's
I can tell you what it is. I grew up in the Panhandle when regularly the Sydney Sun-Telegraph paper would come in, and we would look at the 6-man scores, and Potter Dix would lose 102-0 to Creek Valley.
Yeah.
Or you would go see Layton lose a 6-man game by 100-some points. 8-man, it happens a little bit there, too. You can see 70, 80-point scores. But nobody cries wolf for any of these schools because they're in lower classes from smaller communities.
Yeah.
But because it's the most notable program in the highest class in Nebraska, it gets the most attention.
And you brought up an interesting point there, because I think there's a little bit here of just everybody's never going to be happy, right? Because you brought up an interesting point with the Division I prospects that are being featured, not just at Millard South, but you've got Sutco at Elkhorn South, you've got West Side, you've had Bellevue West a couple years ago that had a good group of Division I prospects as well. This is as much talent as we've ever seen in the Omaha metro area for sure. And I think the state in general, in terms of high-level Division I talent, that's something to be celebrated. That's something I'm excited about, because that does put Nebraska on a map in a different way. But when you get down to the actual competition between high school teams, people get upset about it. And guess what? When you have the demographics of Nebraska in terms of talent, it is going to be a different kind of landscape than a Florida or a Texas or a California, where, by the way, this happens too, right?
Yep.
There's a very famous high school in California, De La Salle, that didn't lose for a decade. Actually did not lose for a decade. People were mad about the conference they were in. That actually might be one of the closest corollaries to where people get mad here, is you would have people busing into that school because they wanted the opportunity to go play in college and to be developed as a football player and things like that, where obviously that happened on a much larger scale and over a much longer period of time. But the coaches would sit there and they'd go, okay, well, what do you want me to do? This kid's willing to sacrifice and bus however many hours to get here to school every day so he can try and be a part of something and try and build for his future. What do you want me to say to that kid? If he is getting here legally, and I mean legally in terms of the rules of the sport, then what am I supposed to say to that kid if he does everything we ask? Now, the legally is where I do want to pause for a second, because there are some cases. Obviously, you mentioned the forfeit that Millard South had to put in earlier this year because of some rule breaking. There are people that think there's way more of that going on than the NSAA slaps on the wrist or whatever you want to call them would indicate. I tend to believe there is more of that going on than is being reported or being caught or whatever. If you have a problem with that, I agree. I think everybody has a problem with that, except for if you're the ones benefiting from it, right? So, if that's the thing we're all mad about, cool. We can all agree on that. Here's the problem. That's not most of what's happening. Most of what's happening is, and I do think, DB and I talked to Mitch Sherman earlier on today on Wednesday. I do think this is sort of a uniquely Nebraska problem. I get there's blowouts and competitive imbalance anywhere. But this specific thing, and I honestly don't think it's really fixable unless you completely overhaul the entire system. And even then, I don't know what that looks like, because there's a few things at play here. One, I mentioned the talent. There's more talent now than there's ever been, but that's going to be cyclical. And when some of that talent gets consolidated, it's more dramatic than it is in other places.
100%.
You don't have Houston going against Dallas or San Antonio or Permian or wherever, right, in Texas, where you're like, oh, there's a dozen D1 kids on that team, and there's a dozen on this team, and there's a dozen over here. That's not Nebraska, right? There's maybe a dozen total. If 6 of them end up on the same team, it's pretty dramatic looking, right?
It is, yes.
That is a unfixable problem, right? Good players want to play together. I'm not going to tell them they can't. They want the best opportunities, but you don't have a dozen more guys to go spread out the other schools to make things a little bit more even.
Right.
That to me is an unfixable problem as part of this equation and pretty unique to Nebraska.
And what if I make this side of the argument too? What if I say, okay, well, and obviously the number 2 team that everyone was kind of almost relying on to take down Millard South was Omaha West Side. It could be Elkhorn South this year. It could
Omaha
be
West Side that got beat by a Central team that also has multiple Division I players on it, by the way.
And probably, some future ones on there too, by the way.
Yeah.
On top of that, when you talk about the competitive balance, so when people are arguing and saying, we want competitive balance, so you want team 1 to 32 to be equal, because that's not sports. That's not how it works.
That's not how any sport works.
We see it in professional all the way to the high school, to amateur, to 8th grade, to your 4th grade t-ball league. Like, I mean, you see it everywhere. There are always going to be teams that are talent deficient and some teams that just aren't as good as other teams.
Yes.
That is how sports work. Are people arguing competitive balance is, okay, well, we just need someone to be able to beat
challenge?
them. Yes.
So you want like 2 or 3 really good teams?
Okay, so if that's a solution, fine. I guess we can figure that out. Like,
and up until this point, that's been true. As I mentioned, Millard South has 1 state title appearance during this run of dominance. It's like they have 1 state title to their name right now. Like Millard North won 5 in 12 years from 03 to 15. Like, that was more imbalanced than anything we've seen over the last 10 years since then.
And don't talk about some of the teams from the 60s, 70s, 80s that were in 6 or 8-man schools that had
you want me to
runs
count off,
on runs
You want me to count
runs.
off the prep titles in a row? So
please do.
Let's go. 85, 86, 87, 88, 89 in a row. Oh, by the way, they also won in 83. So they won, 7 out of 8, 6 out of 7 years in the 80s. That's one of the better stretches in high school history for Nebraska. Maybe they were having this conversation then. Maybe they weren't. But I'll be honest, a lot of those weren't particularly close either. Like, you had a lot of guys. You have guys that end up in the NFL from those teams. And there was less overall talent in the state of Nebraska, I would argue, at a high Division I level than we're talking about now. So, like, this is not new. B, the talent part of it isn't fixable. And there is another part of that equation, though, that I want to bring up. And this might be fixable, but I think it's a mistake to change it. And that's the open enrollment part of this.
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up. I want to get to one thing before you get to that first.
Go ahead.
From what my understanding is, I want to be completely clear. This is more of my opinion than how I believe or how maybe I need to look into it more. But from everything where I was a student athlete in the state of Nebraska, 10 years ago, that I've covered and been a media partner for the NSA as, one of their, little lanyard wearing members for the past couple of years when I go to state championships. The NSAA's responsibility in this situation and across all sports, not just football, baseball, swimming and diving, everything, is the NSAA's responsibility to Nebraska high school student athletes is the opportunity to play sports, not the opportunity to compete for state championships, not the opportunity to play and compete with the top teams in your state. It is the opportunity to get out on the field and play a sport in which maybe you had no reason to go out and attempt to try before. If you are a kid from a C1 school, if you're me that came out from Sydney in the Panhandle, we didn't have tennis teams. We didn't have a swimming and diving team. There was no soccer team. I talked to people here in the Omaha Metro that can't believe that that's a reality, that I had a town of 6,000, 7,000 people that couldn't field a soccer program. We didn't have soccer fields in Sydney to be able to play on, to be completely clear. So if the opportunity to play is the responsibility of the NSAA, I'm not saying that this is the case, but the NSAA should not worry about what competitive imbalance there is, because their responsibility, if that is their motto and their MO, is to make sure that every student athlete that wants to put on a helmet and strap up that chin strap every single Friday or Thursday night gets the chance to do it, regardless of the result that comes out of it. That's my thought and my opinion, and that is what I've had to try to preach to everybody from the beginning. Because what happens is we only seem to remember the final games, right?
Sure.
We only remember Papio South beating Omaha West Side in state basketball. We only seem to remember Millard South running through kind of the state playoffs and such. We only seem to remember those results. But we don't seem to remember the Omaha Benson kid who just this past season learned football for the very first time and got his opportunity to play American football and learn it from a coach that took his time away from whatever whatever he's got going on in his life to give back to that family, that community, that student. That's the responsibility of the NSA. That's the responsibility of the schools. When you want to talk about the competitive imbalance, yes, sure, it can be tragic at different times for the competitors at the schools. If Elkhorn South gets blown out by Millard South in a state championship game, that will be disappointing for Elkhorn South. Absolutely. But will it be as upsetting for someone from Lincoln High who just learned what the laces on the football are meant for? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I don't want to generalize this and make this into something that it's not, but it's not just those schools either. Again, smaller schools. I talked to very many small schools. I just talked to the 6-man football coach from Hampton. Their program is consolidating at the end of this year. They have 11 kids on their team. And they probably have 18 kids available to play football at their school.
Sure.
You don't think that some of those kids were just asked, hey, we kind of need you to go for football this year?
Yeah.
The opportunity to play.
Absolutely.
The opportunity to play. All right, I'll let you go.
So there's a couple things there, and I think it does tie into the open enrollment portion of this. Number one, open enrollment is not an NSAA policy. They have nothing to do with that. That is a state of Nebraska policy. So I think we've made that clear before, but I just want to start there when you are talking about the NSAA. When you're talking about the NSAA and competitive balance, I do think some of the changes they've made in terms of more strategically scheduling is smart. That's a thing you can do. I don't think it'll have a huge effect, but it is something they can do, and I think it was smart to do. Yep. I think part of the reason this is, again, a uniquely Nebraska problem is I mentioned the talent. I mentioned the population centers, right? Omaha, you're talking about, 80% of the population of the state lives in Omaha and Lincoln, which are an hour away from each other.
Yep.
And then the rest of the state, the other 7 hours of the state, is 10 to 20% of the population. That's a rough guesstimate off the top of my head, but I think it's close.
Yep.
Right? So that's a very unique Omaha, Nebraska, Lincoln situation as well.
And I think off the top of my head, I think it was 2006, 2007, the last time a non-Omaha or Lincoln school won a Class A football title, which would have been Kearney. Yeah, that would have been the last time. So again, we're talking about the more kids you have in your area, the better opportunity you have to get talented people around your school. That's how it works.
And Lincoln has one title in 22 years.
Yes.
Right? Lincoln Southeast in 11. They've got one title outside of the Omaha area in 22 years. So, part of it is a demographics in terms of population basis area. Part of it's an Omaha problem to the rest of the state, right? But
do we ever complain about the competitive imbalance of Omaha compared to the rest of Class A schools in boys basketball?
Not really.
That never seems to get brought up. We saw Southeast and North Star make the state tournament last year, and it's been some time since a Lincoln school has been able to break through. Made the tournament and actually got into a state championship game too.
Yeah.
Granted, that still needs to get broken, but how come no one cries wolf when that's the case?
Yeah.
No one says, oh, Omaha, they need to have their own city championship. We still call them Nebraska state championships, do we not?
Yes, we do. And there's that kind of brings me to the open enrollment thing of another, you mentioned the city championship. That's a way that some of these states and some of these governing bodies have solved some of these issues. But guess what? Millard South beat Millard North 70-7 this year.
Yeah.
Right? Millard South is doing this, two teams in the city, right? So that's not a solve in my mind. When Lincoln Southeast was running through people in the late 90s, early 2000s, that wouldn't have been a solve for Lincoln. When Creighton Prep was doing it in the 80s, I just ran off, that's an Omaha team again. That wouldn't have been a solve for that. So you sit here and you go, okay, the city championship thing doesn't make any sense. There's other people that do parochial schools versus public schools.
Right.
That's not really a thing here. There's a handful. Obviously, you got Prep, you got Scut, but in terms of there's one or two per class, there's not a ton of them per class to be okay, let's have our own Catholic school championship or private school championship versus public school. That's not really an answer either. The open enrollment makes this a very uniquely Nebraska problem because you can go anywhere you want. And listen, pro open enrollment, I've been on the record as that.
Yes.
I think that is a very important thing because of the way Nebraska does their public funding for schools. It is tax-based based on where you live.
Yes.
If you can't afford to move to a place that has more funding as a school and therefore more opportunities, you should have the right to send your kid there if that's something you can do.
Yes.
You shouldn't have to move to send your kid to a better school. You shouldn't have to pay private school tuition. If you can get your kid to that school, they deserve to go there.
Oh, but Ravi, this only applies to football, right? It's only for the kids who can actually play football?
Actually, I was at Millard North when the International Baccalaureate program got started. Guess what? A bunch of people transferred to Millard North. Central has an IB program as well. A bunch of people transferred to Central. Omaha North is a magnet school, great magnet school. A bunch of people transfer there. There's people that transfer to these schools for a bunch of different reasons, academic, athletic, extracurricular, whatever it is. Whatever opportunity you're looking for as a student, as that student's family, whatever, that's why open enrollment's important. That is something that I don't think Nebraska should touch at all. As long as the tax and funding system works the way it is, which again is a much, much bigger lift than just let's make football more competitive. And I would argue like that's not a good reason to change it. There might be good reasons to change it. I don't know. I'm not in the weeds on that issue, but making football more competitive is not a good reason to change it.
Yep.
If that's the case, then this is not a fixable problem. And I would argue it's actually not even that big of a problem.
I'm with you, but also we're speaking to masses that are just angry.
I get that. Upset. And listen, I get why people are angry. I famously Millard North guy. You think I enjoy watching Millard South of all teams beat Millard North 70-7? I was there when they won the first state title in 03, and I watched every one of those 5 from 03 to 15. Right? This is a place I care a lot about. You think that's an easy pill for me to swallow? To say, oh, Millard South is 63 points better than us now? You think I enjoy that? Because I got to be honest with you, I don't. And not even that. I watched Papillion La Vista South beat them 51-0 this year. You think that was fun for me? Because I know Papillion La Vista South isn't winning a state title. There's a part of me that can be like, okay, it's Millard South, got a dozen D1 guys, that'll end. They'll move on, whatever. I can sort of live with that. But it's not just a Millard South thing, right? There's competitive imbalance all over the place. I sat there and watched Millard North lose 51-7, or 51-7 to Papillion La Vista South. And then I see them turn around a week later and beat Lincoln East 42-14.
A top 10 team.
Right? So like I sit there and I go, okay, there's competitive imbalance all over the place. And no matter how much I hate what it looks like sometimes, and believe me, I hated what it looked like at times.
Right.
I don't think that's I don't think it's a fixable problem. And B, I don't actually think it's that big of a problem because everything has always been cyclical. Always. We went through the lists of the dynasties and then who won this, and then they went on this run, and then this other team went on this. You know, there might not be a better team in state history than that 2019 Bellevue West team. I'll always argue for my 03 Millard North guys, and a lot of people argue for like 22 West Side or whatever, right? But, you know, you could make an argument and you're talking about not just different schools, you're talking about different school districts.
Right.
You're talking Millard versus West Side versus Bellevue versus Creighton Prep versus Lincoln Southeast. You're talking different districts in Class A. It's not just like, well, all the talents in Millard or all the talents in West Side or wherever, right? And so, this thing is super cyclical. So fixing a temporary problem with a permanent solution always seems like a bad idea to me.
Yep.
The other part here is I just don't think unless the cheating becomes widespread, and I don't think it is. I think there's some of it.
Yeah.
I think it's isolated.
I think we'd be foolish to assume that there's not something that's going on.
I would agree.
I think it's also foolish to assume that it's happening everywhere and that everyone is doing it. Because if that were the case, wouldn't we see this be more problematic?
Yeah.
Like we would see it through more teams, right?
Like
the suggestion that we offered where it's Millard South and 2 other teams, right? Because then everyone would just stockpile weapons and be able just to, don't want to term high school student athletes as weapons, but you know what I mean? Like
they'd stockpile talent.
Exactly.
And you would sit there and you go, okay, so these 3 teams are all really, really good and everybody else gets hammered by them, right? Or whatever the case is. But I sit here and I go, okay, so you've got this juggernaut Millard South team, great, whatever. By the way, we don't even know if they're going to win a state championship this year. We have no idea.
They still have to play the games.
They still have to play the games, and heaven forbid, you don't want anybody to get injured, but you don't know, it's football.
Yep.
Right? So what happens if their Alabama commit at quarterback gets hurt? Are we still having this discussion? I don't know. I have no idea.
Right.
And I hope that doesn't happen. I love Jet Tamala. But you don't know. And so I sit here and I go, okay, you've got this issue over here. And I don't think, because I don't even hear people bring up the cheating really. Maybe it's insinuated and I'm just ignoring it. But I don't know that that's the thing that people are that mad about. Because, and I'll be honest, I'm not singling out any one school when I say I think there's some cheating going on. I think there's a little over here. I think there's a little over there. I think there's a little bit in lots of different places. I don't think it's widespread, and I don't think it's isolated to one school.
Yep.
What I will say is, unless that is a widespread issue and you can catch and punish people for it, then that's obviously a fixable problem there. Otherwise, I think you just kind of have to wait for the cycle to end of whatever Millard South's dominance is. And guess what? Most of these guys are seniors, right? And a lot of times what happens in this, you see in college football all the time, especially now. If you've got a front-loaded class, guys want to play. Guys want to play as sophomores now. That wasn't a thing when I was coming up, or probably even when you were coming up, although in smaller schools, guys do tend to play earlier. But in Class A, playing as a sophomore at a big school wasn't a thing. You were on JV. If you got to suit up for varsity, you were happy, right?
But famously, a perennial top 10 team in Kearney, the Rule Class 8 program, they don't even suit up freshmen on their varsity roster.
Yeah.
And they routinely do not play sophomores unless they absolutely need to.
Absolutely. And so, like, there's going to be, I've already heard people talking about, well, have you heard about this class, like this school's sophomore class, or have you heard about this school's freshman class? Oh, man, they're really good. And so, like, I don't think this is a long-term problem. I don't think this is a problem that you have to change legislation for, certainly, to get rid of open enrollment or anything like that. What I think it is people don't like seeing their kids lose big. And I get it.
Yep.
I get it. But here's the other thing, and I'm going to get a little philosophical here on you for a second, because here's the thing that has happened as a society. And I don't have kids, so take my opinion for what it is. I think we have gotten so protective of keeping kids insulated from failure that we've failed to help them realize and learn the benefits of failure, right? There's been studies about kids failing early in sort of controlled situations and how that better prepares them for life, because it helps them with critical thinking and problem solving and just resiliency and being able to overcome things in their life. There is a huge, I think, societal problem with people not experiencing failure early enough in their life so that they can move past it later in their life. And guess what? That's one of the things sports is perfect for. Mm-hmm. I had a kid when I was coaching high school basketball, and I'll be as vague as possible because I don't want to put this kid on blast. I had a kid when I was coaching high school basketball. It was a reserve tournament, and he had a little bit of a short fuse sometimes. Good kid, genuinely really liked him. He lost it on a ref. He made a dumb play. He missed a layup, and they got a rebound. He tried to steal the ball back. He was a big, should not have been down there. Just get back down the court, right? He got down there, tried to steal the ball back, fouled him, grabbed the ball, threw the ball, cursed at a ref, immediately got ejected, obviously, right? And so I'm sitting there, I'm like 23 years old, and I'm like, well, I really don't know what to do in this situation here. And do I go in and yell at him? Do I rip him a new one and say you're off the team and whatever? I'm a reserve coach. I don't even know if I have the power to throw him off a team at this point. And so I waited till halftime. I was like, hey, go back to the locker room. It was almost halftime. We'll talk in a second. And I sent the rest of the team back out to go warm up. And I go, listen, man, obviously what you did is unacceptable. Can't be doing that. And he was immediately remorseful and contrite. And I sit there and I go, hey, listen, because I could tell like this, and he was a kid when he knew he did something wrong, like it ate at him pretty badly, and I didn't want it to do that in a way that I thought was going to be damaging. And so I said, listen, man, obviously that's unacceptable. You're going to go out, you're going to apologize to that referee. You're not going to play the rest of the game. And you're going to be suspended for a little bit. I have to talk with the head coach and see what that looks like. I don't know. But here's what we need to remember about this moment. If this happened in your real life, the consequences are pretty severe. Mm-hmm. You do this in class. You do this to your parents. If you're older and you do this to a boss, you do this to a spouse, you do this to a stranger in a bar somewhere, like the consequences can get away from you in a hurry. I was like, that's why sports are great, because I can sit here in this moment and help you learn from this. And hopefully it never happens again because it happened in sports and you learn from it, so that when you come to the real part of your life that has real consequences, you don't have to suffer this failure there where the consequences can get on top of you in a hurry, right? And so I don't know, personally, I don't know if that helped that kid or not. But that moment right there is one of the reasons I think sports matter and why I think failure in sports matter. Listen, I think our varsity team that year won one game, right? Like that was not a great varsity team. I'm not going to pretend like I worked miracles on JV and reserve either, right? Like we did our best, but we were up against it a little bit. But learning from that failure in kind of a safe and insulated environment is one of the best things you can do. I get everybody wants to win, right? A lot of times you don't learn that much from winning. Right. Like there's a part of me that feels bad for the Millard South kids over the last 2 years. They haven't had to overcome much, right? Not in terms of on the field. I don't know what's going on in their personal lives. I'm not going to do that. But they haven't had to overcome much. There's a part of me that feels for them and goes, man, like you may have had a great experience. I hope it serves you as well later in life as some other things will, Like, not to go back to Millard North, but in 2002, that was a really, really good football team. They lost to North Platte at North Platte in the state, or in 01. They lost to North Platte in North Platte at the state semifinals in a team that they probably would have won state that year. The next year in 02, they lost to Lincoln Southeast. That was the kind of the marker, the last great Lincoln Southeast team from the late 90s, early 2000s. And Millard North lost on a really, really bad call by a referee on 4th down to that Lincoln Southeast team. And guess what? That spurred on one of the greatest teams in Nebraska high school history. Damon talks about it all the time. 93 Nebraska, missed kick. He says 94 doesn't happen without 93. And 95 doesn't happen without 94, right? Like being able to go through some of that adversity. We just saw it with Nebraska against Michigan State. Nebraska's going to be a better football team for playing 2 crappy quarters against Michigan State.
Yep.
They just are, right? Part of me feels bad for some of these teams that never experience that, because that's one of the core values of sports in my mind, is learning to fail and learning to deal with failure successfully. That's something that maybe these guys at Millard South aren't going to get experience until they're in college. I hope by the time they're in college, where the stakes are higher and there's NIL money on their name and things like that, that they still have the opportunity to do it in a way that doesn't really hurt them for the rest of their lives. Because there's a lot of times, it was the recruiting pitch Matt Rule made to Patrick
how dare you,
to Dylan Raiola, is he said, hey, if you get drafted first overall, you're going to go to a terrible team.
Yep.
You don't want that to be the first time you've struggled in your life, because
get ready for it.
Like, there is real consequences and real people's jobs and real people's livelihoods on the line. And if that's the first time you're struggling, boy, is that a tough place to learn.
Yep.
High school is the place for that.
And I want to alternate this too. I know that obviously it's that entire speech and everything that you had is something that kind of it turns a nose up at Millard South a little bit, right? Because it is one of those that just says, hey, listen, you guys are very successful. You have all the talent. You have the athletes, that sort of such. You are such a great team that maybe not going through the adversity is the win that everyone else will get. But I also want to give a little bit of thought to Millard South. If they have, built up this program, and regardless of how the transfers got there, whatever the case is, I know that there's, the different arguments about the opt-ins, how many kids are part of the Junior Patriots program, all that sort of stuff, right?
And to be clear, almost none of this is the kid's fault. Like,
right.
Let's start there.
None of it is the kid's fault. But if it's an opportunity, so how about this, right? Put it in a real world perspective. If you had an opportunity to stay at a company, not this one, Hurrdat Sports is great.
Love it.
But if you had an opportunity to go to a different organization, a different business, right? And the business that you were currently a part of maybe wasn't up to snuff, but this was maybe a better tier, or was a better opportunity, or you could move further ahead, or there was a chance for you to work your way up a position. Wouldn't you evaluate where you were currently? Or you would look at your circumstances and say, okay, what benefits do I have in staying? What benefits do I have in leaving, right? That's what we have to choose as adults. And obviously that comes with employment, that comes with all these other things that happen.
I don't have to pretend. That's how I ended up at Hurrdat Sports.
Exactly.
I mean, that's how I got here.
But then when you look at what Millard South has done, and again, I don't know what all the stories are. I don't know how many of these kids were middle school Patriots, or how many, what that looked like. I don't know. But if there was a chance that there were some maybe fringe athletes who said, I could play with some of the best athletes in the state of Nebraska, in my own city, and maybe that gets more eyes on me, for me to get a new opportunity to go play college football, or to get a different chance at maybe another sport that another school may be able to look at me for, because XYZ coach was here, or whatever program was talking to my head coach or my assistant coach about, yeah, this kid is great. We've also got other kids that we can play too. Those are real opportunities. And if a kid's goal is to play college football, and they don't care where it's at, whether it's Bemidji State or if it's, roastbeef.com or whatever, they can have that opportunity to do it, and maybe it helps them by going to a program like Millard South. I don't know, again, I don't know the personal stories. I don't know if that's the case, but I mean, realistically too, if that's what part of the solution is, and it gets more eyes on some kids in the state of Nebraska, how can we not be for that? We legitimately have SEC coaches coming to Millard South football games, and they're not just looking at Millard South. They have to watch the other team too.
Famously, that is how it works when you're watching a game. Here's the other thing I'll even put. I'll put even past the football part of it. What if a kid looks at his situation and says, hey, the only way I'm going to get to go to college is if I get to go for free?
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
Like, what if it's not even about like, oh, I want to be a great college football player? What if they're like, I'm pretty good at football, and the only way I'm going to college is if I go for free, or if I get a huge scholarship from a D2 school or whatever, right? Most D2s don't give out full rides, but You can make a big chunk. You can put a huge dent in that, right? So maybe you don't have to take out as many student loans. You don't have to take out as many grants or scholarships.
Well, too, an NAIA program, there's plenty of there's tiers of sports across all college athletics.
I mean, listen, there's probably more full rides at NAIA than there are Division II.
100%.
If I'm being honest, because you can play with the math a little bit, right? So there's opportunities here, and it's not just about football. I think that's the thing that we forget is it's not just about football. It is about some people will look at this as, hey, whether it's an IB program, whether it's a tennis program, what if there's a really, really good tennis player in Sydney? Do they have to stay there and not play tennis?
Or do they opt in and travel an hour and a half to Scottsbluff every single day? That's the closest tennis program that they would have.
What if their parents can't afford to move to Scottsbluff, but they can afford to get them there every day?
Yeah.
What do? Do you let that person play or not? I mean, it doesn't even have to be that dramatic. There's a school near Omaha. I think it's Fremont. If it's not, I apologize. That doesn't have tennis courts, right? So if there's a really good tennis player in Fremont, what do you do? Mm-hmm. Do they just don't get to play tennis? They don't get to be good at the thing that they could be really great at? And so we care because it's football, right?
Yep.
We care because it's football, but this is not a football specific discussion because if you make a rule for football, it has to apply to everybody. That's the thing that we miss here, right? Is it can't just be we have to make Class A football more competitive. There's consequences to that for Class B, C1, C2, A1, 8-man, 8-2, and 6-man. And then there's consequences for basketball and girls basketball and volleyball and tennis and swimming and diving and whatever else, right? There's consequences that we don't see just because we don't like the look of a 70-7 football game. I don't like the look of it either. Yep. It sucks. Yep. You know what? In 2 years, I hope that the team I root for is the one putting on the 70-7 beating.
Yep.
And it's entirely possible they will be, right? None of this is permanent. Let's not make temporary issues and give them permanent solutions that have way bigger waves and ripples than we can ever imagine in order to try and get a few Class A football games to be a little closer or to get a couple teams closer to the top. Because guess what? That was a game in the Class A state title about halfway through the third.
Yep.
We kind of forget that part of it, right?
Oh, you mean the opposing team Westside didn't just roll over and hand a state championship over?
No.
Interesting.
They were 100% in that game for about 2.5 quarters.
They have to play the game.
You have to go out and play it. And again, maybe the adversity Millard South went through was 2 years ago when they lost to Elkhorn South in the semifinals.
Even a couple years before that, they were the number 1 overall seed and lost to 16 seed Omaha North.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a program that kind of earned its way back to the top and got to the top of the mountaintop, and now we're scolding them for that.
And we don't like how it looks now. I get it. But now is not forever.
Yep.
That's not how this state has ever worked. If Millard South does it, it'll be the first time it's ever been done, that it's been a sustained, just nobody's ever catching them. It'll be the first time it's ever been done in the state of Nebraska. And like I said, uniquely Nebraska problems have uniquely Nebraska solutions, right? Millard South, they have all the talent now. All that talent, there's not going to be this level of Division I talent in Nebraska forever.
Yep.
We know that for a fact. It goes through phases as different groups of kids come through, and we had a really good basketball group, and football was way down at that time. Now we've got a really good football group. Basketball is a little bit down. These things become cyclical, and I don't think we have to sit here and just say, well, I guess it's just going to be like this forever. Just the very demographics of the state, the same demographics that have caused this issue, I think are the ones that are going to solve it without too much action from the outside in order to force it into that. Do I think it's smart the NSA is doing a little bit more strategic scheduling? Absolutely. There's some teams that just doesn't make sense they were playing each other.
Yep.
But outside of that, I really don't think we want to start pulling on those strings and unraveling things that we have no intention or no business of messing with.
I think we can wrap it up here. Obviously, this is more of our opinion-based. You can come at us however you would like to, but when it comes to maybe some of the more descriptive stuff, obviously our own Mike Sauter would be a great follow there. He'll be on Hurrdat Sports Live on Friday morning, so if you are looking for that, you can check him out at 9 o'clock. He will be on, and I'm sure this will be a topic that's brought up. I thought DB hit it well, and I think that we should probably end somewhere around here, too. Sometimes small changes can tackle a big issue. You don't have to have this overwhelming bill or this overwhelming mark or parades in the streets to cause a big change. Sometimes the smallest solutions can resolve some of your bigger problems. But I think there is a part of this, too, that I need to be completely frank and clear about. As I grew up on one side of the state and have traversed my way over to this side, it's supposed to be unfair. It's not meant for Sydney to be able to be and have the same resources and responsibility to compete as Omaha Scud. Two programs that are both in Class B. It's not supposed to be fair. And I will add this too. People that arrive from the western part of the state or from rural areas, they get it. They understand. Famously, a lot of teams from rural areas have went on long championship runs. And regardless of if they were from small patriarchal schools or, whatever, or parochial schools, parochial schools, if they came from private schools, they still came from small communities.
Yeah.
It's not like they pulled kids from Omaha Metro and made them drive down to Falls City Sacred Heart. That wasn't the case. They had who was available for them. It sounds very unfair, and it is tough. It's a tough pill to swallow, like you said.
It is tough.
We don't like seeing 70-7. We don't like seeing 77-0.
Especially when it's 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, right?
But for anyone that has those two comments of you believe that this sport in the state of Nebraska is broken, or you don't believe that students deserve the opportunity to better themselves or put themselves in a better situation, I don't have an answer for you because I don't think I can change your opinion.
I don't either. And like you said, sometimes small changes make a big impact. Let's not, as DB says, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, open enrollment is a good thing for the state.
Yeah.
It is. It's a thing that I think is entirely necessary with the way things are set up. So to me, that's a non-starter, right? That being said, if anybody is cheating, let's catch them.
Yep.
Like, I'm more than happy with that. Like, I don't want anybody to get around the rules, whether it's my guys at Millard North, whether it's Millard South, whether it's anybody else, right? I don't want anybody getting around the rules. Open enrollment provides opportunity. It's a good opportunity. Don't make people against open enrollment because you want to cheat, right? They make it easy enough for you to go wherever you want, right? There's no point in cheating. Knock it off. Like, figure it out. If you can't figure out a way to do it within Nebraska's very lax rules to allow you to go wherever you want to go to pursue whatever opportunities you want to do, then frankly, you don't deserve to win.
Yep. Don't ruin it for everyone else. Nebraska Preps postgame special. Ravi Lulla, Austin Jacobsen, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. If you're looking for more NebPreps, Hurrdat Sports, of course. And as we mentioned, Mike Sauter, Jacob Padilla, great follows on the NebPreps pages. You can also find more of their stuff on all the social media channels and, of course, on our YouTube page.